Ahead, I'll talk with National Geographic photographer Jason Edwards about icebergs to iguanas, photographic journeys around the world. I'll also ask him about his advice for photographers, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Jason Edwards has been at the forefront of natural history photography for more than 3 decades. Jason's photos have appeared in hundreds of publications, including National Geographic magazine, BBC Wildlife, Sports Illustrated, and The New Yorker, just to name a few. His imagery has also appeared in everything from environmental campaigns to Hollywood blockbusters. And he joins us to talk about his new coffee table book, Icebergs to Iguanas, which features his National Geographic photos and the stories behind them. Jason, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, in the beginning of the book, you share basically your life story, your early childhood, and how that influenced you becoming a photographer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I didn't have a normal childhood. I guess some people would think that I had a little bit of a Gerald Durrell upbringing. I grew up outside of Melbourne, and there was no other houses around, so there were always snakes and reptiles and frogs and everything in the house. My father was a long-haul truck driver, one of those famous Aussie truck drivers, and he was always finding owls and injured wildlife, kangaroos, joeys on the road. And so through all my early years, there was always animals in the house. And then, of course, I finished high school and was very fortunate to be offered a position at the Royal Melbourne Zoo, the Zoological Board of Victoria, where I started as a zookeeper at the ripe old age of 18. And my studies over that following 12 years, my multiple degrees were all in animal sciences and wildlife. So I literally, for that first, 30 years of my life, I wasn't disconnected from non-human species pretty much for a single day. And of course, having a camera in my hand meant that I was going to start documenting all of the things that were falling before my eyes.
Now, I want to talk to you about photography and, what that means to you and how that's enriched your life. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about the book itself. This, as I understand, features a lot of the photography that you did for National Geographic. And tell us a bit about what people are going to find here and how the book is organized.
So I've been with Geographic now for about 24 years, and I sat down one day after much prompting from Geographic, and I wrote down a list of the stories that meant something to me personally. Whether they were the most successful or not was irrelevant. It was just how they connected with me and my time as I matured as a photographer. We then went through, we being myself and the editorial team, and picked a selection of those stories to begin this journey, and hopefully the journey continues. If the book's a success, that's the plan. And so I went back to my journals. I've kept field journals for about 30 years, or more than 30 years actually, and started telling those stories. So the book is a behind-the-scenes look at my career, I guess, and those stories in particular. But as you mentioned, it also takes people on that journey and how I got to National Geographic, and in the latter part of the book, my thought process, how I interpret the things around me and what I'm looking for in imagery. So it's a little bit of a how-to for photographing for National Geographic, at least from my perspective.
And what I like is the variety in this book. Of course, there's animals because that's one of your passions, but there's also people. There are insects and architecture as well, and some of the patterns which I found interesting, not only in the patterns of, say, an animal's skin, their coloring, but the architecture. And there's an absolutely gorgeous section about the ceiling of mosques, which are fascinating to me.
I mean, it was interesting as I evolved into my career. In my early years, I refused to take a single picture of a person. I kid you not. I would go away for months and I would come back, and an editor, whether it was another Geographic, even before National Geographic, and they would say just one picture of a Maasai or just something like that. And I'd be going, no, no humans. But then as you mature, and I'm sure you know this as a journalist yourself, you start to see the story differently. And then all of a sudden I found myself doing people work and enjoying it, and the richness of cultures and faiths and architecture all around the world. So that changed for me quietly behind the scenes until I actually found myself doing assignments that were solely based on cultures and people and faith and history. And when I looked at the work or the body of work from my career, I realized how much that had become a part of who I was as a person. And the Mercanas, the story you refer to, I contracted MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, in Oman before I started a shoot in Iran. And I was basically on death's bed, and I went to hospital, and they had no medication, of course, because of the sanctions. And they sent me back to the home of an elderly lady who nursed me back to health with some friends there. And when I photographed those ceilings, that was about all I was capable of doing once I got back on my feet. And it gave me an opportunity to slow my mind and give more time to that. And the text in that story is actually about some of the things that happen to you in the field. And my body has been a cesspool of disease and injury for more than 30 years. I have this innate ability to heal well, so the surgeons tell me. But I've been very unwell on numerous occasions. And that story manifested itself out of illness, which was a lovely outcome for something that was nearly the end of the line for me.
You shared those stories of how dangerous photography can be and your travels. At one point, you were so sick that you lost a year of your memory. You lost fingers. Was there ever a point that you said, this is too dangerous, I should stop?
Well, I think my wife Megan tells me that I have zero genetic protection coding in my DNA makeup, I think, but there's never really been a time where I thought I should stop, no matter how bad the injury or the illness was. That episode that you refer to was very nasty. I came back from the Bolivian border and collapsed and became a boy in a bubble. I was in an isolation ward for a long period of time, and 12 doctors, 6 saying one thing, another 6 saying another. And then I did lose 12 months of my memory that I never got back. But I got a lot of parking fines in that 12 months because I kept forgetting that I owned a car. But I think the only time I've really had to step back into the fray is when I became a father. And for the first few years, I didn't travel much. Geographic kept me at home. They wanted me to have that opportunity with my son, which was lovely. But once I had to start doing very difficult assignments again, that was hard for Will, that's my son, for Will and I to part. We're very, very close. And I had to make a decision that I either get back on the plane or I don't get back on the plane. And the career changes and I do something else. And at one point, I was quite distressed. I was in Latin America and I was finding it difficult to be away. And my wife said to me, now's the time to make the decision. You cannot make mistakes where you are. You're there or you come home. There's nothing in between. And my wife's amazing and she's very pragmatic. And that flicked a switch for me to say, okay, when I get on the plane, I'm back in that mindset. Whatever happens, happens. And I'll do the best I can at that time. And otherwise, I would have had to have changed careers. I think I was finding it very difficult to do those farewells. My son actually said to me one day, he was only young, and he said, Daddy, promise me you'll come home and everything will be okay. And even at that age, I remember saying to him, which might sound quite brutal, but I said, buddy, Dad doesn't make promises in the field, and thankfully the gods have meant that I've still come home safely and soundly, or not always in one piece, but I had to really make that decision at one point in my career. Otherwise, I'd be using these shoulders for throwing bags of cement, I guess, or something.
So there's risk involved in what you do. And as you point out, sometimes you probably take more risk than you really should. But to try to minimize those risks, what kind of prep goes into going on an expedition to take these photographs?
It's a fantastic question. Probably less than you would imagine, which is maybe why I get so injured and so sick. But I mean, with my background and decades of natural history work, wildlife and natural history work, and my studies and everything, my knowledge base for the regions that I work is probably, I would say, maybe a little bit above average. So I have that knowledge base to fall back on. I've also spent more than 35 years working with Indigenous people all over the world. So I feel very comfortable landing, even in a country that I've never been in, with a camera in the hand and walking into the most unstable market. It's not ego, it's not overconfidence, it's not anything. My brain switches into a mode that makes me feel at home wherever I go. For those who are into the signs, I guess I'm a Cancer, so our home is always with us. But I will do whatever research I have the opportunity to do before I go, trying to ascertain elements of that culture or the ecosystem that I'm going to document. But it is one of those things. Sometimes I actually move pretty quickly. I might come back and then have to leave quite soon. So the opportunity to research is not there. One thing I would say is that I'm pretty much like everyone else. I get home and I live in Melbourne and I live in the inner city, and I can become frustrated sitting in the traffic going 3 kilometres to my office from my home, whereas I can sit in a tree for 5.5 weeks, 20 hours a day and be completely at peace, or I can be in a very dysfunctional airport where everyone else's minds are breaking. And I am just in that space where it's like, this is what I do. So the minute I start traveling, there's a duality to my personality that kicks in. And I'm in that scenario where, okay, I'm on the road and this is just how it is. But I do very much love being in remote places or with places that I'm not familiar with, because I feel at home in those scenarios.
Is that part of what keeps you going after 30 years, still wanting to explore the world, see the world through your lens and how you interpret that?
Very much so. I think I often say to people, I get tired, Dan. There's no two ways about it. And I can go for days without going to bed. There's no two ways about it. But I think for me, I find everything fascinating and beautiful. Even the most hard subjects matters. I've done stories on HIV in children in Uganda and bushmeat markets in the Amazon and all of those things, which are soul destroying. They are soul destroying. And it's not the premise of what I do. I don't live on reportage where I'm only doing war zones or anything. That's not what I do. But to get out of bed every day, I have a saying to myself, and I have to do it better or different. Not than the rest of the world, but that is in there. But I have to do it better or different than I've done before if it's a new location that I think I'm capable of doing. But the fact that I love everything and I find everything of interest, that's what helps me get back on the road when I don't want to leave home, because there's the potential for telling a story for someone who doesn't have that opportunity. And it's a privilege. What I do is an absolute privilege. I've had a lifetime of seeing the world, and I take that very seriously. For me, there's no ego at all in saying, okay, I've been in 20 countries this year, which I have. I've been in more than 20 countries, but that's irrelevant. It's actually, what can I do there that changes people's perspective of another culture or faith or their understanding of ecosystems or conservation. I take that very seriously. I probably take it, I've been told, at Geographic more seriously than most, and sometimes to my own detriment, but I have these opportunities, so it would be remiss of me, or the wrong thing, not to try and do it as best I can whenever I leave home.
I'm talking with Jason Edwards about Icebergs to Iguanas, photographic journeys around the world. And our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. One of the things I found that resonated with me in this book is that, especially in two different things, in that the sort of cycle of life. And one cycle was with the animals. And, how that works and, who's predator, who's prey, et cetera. But then I also thought in terms of that whole section about where ships go to die. Mm. And there's a cycle of life there for these inanimate objects that, to me, in a way, kind of resonated with the other cycle in the natural world.
That's an amazing point that you make, and I'm so happy that did resonate with you, because for me in that book, that story was so seminal in my career. I was much younger when I photographed that story, and I actually went there to Western India because I saw a story on 60 Minutes as a child, and they talked about the biologically dead ocean and all of these sorts of things. And even as 12 or 13 or whatever I was when I saw that story, I went, there has to be more to that. This just can't be what it is. There's a cycle of life and there's industry and all of these things that impact local communities as well as the ecosystem. And so eventually I started funding shoots into that hellhole. And it is a hellhole. It's Dante's fifth circle, if you like. It's men are burning to death in the ships from oil fires, and the beaches were covered in snow, but the snow was asbestos, and PCBs, all of these things. And so when I made the connections, which is so often the case about going into the field, you try and meet people and make connections. I managed to get smuggled in there on and off over a couple of years, and they just set me loose. So I was at the same risk not the same risk, they were far more risk, but I was kicking the asbestos and the sheets of steel were falling off the ships next to me and all of those sorts of things. But I also realised that here were people who were earning 400 to 500% more a day than they would be earning working farms in other parts of India. And so they were supporting their family circles and their marriage circles by doing this dangerous job. And it was more complex. And when I watched the ships being beached, humanity has a strange relationship with maritime law and with vessels. I mean, that's how we, apart from Silk Road and other routes, how we conquered the world. There's been, thousands of years of humans being connected with vessels. And so watching them come to the shore and then be dissected by an army of human ants was quite fascinating to me. And I felt quite moved by that whole story. And I've actually wondered how I would see it if I came back to do it again, to reverse that process and to look at it again. And just recently I made a new contact that said that they would make that happen for me. Just not too sure emotionally whether I need to draw a line in the sand of it. I barely got out of there alive. A few things went wrong on those shoots, and I'm not afraid to go back, but whether I would see it the same or differently now as a father and someone who's 20 years older.
Well, there's so much in this book that we don't have time to talk about. You talked about in some cases where something was just soul-destroying to have to look at and share with people. But let's talk about the flip side. What have been some of the most inspirational or moving things that you've photographed?
I mean, and I'm quite spiritual, I would imagine. I love all the faiths. I find faith fascinating, and I get to work. It's an honour to work within all the faiths that humanity has. So, but for me, I find that because I've spent so much of my career alone or working with teams, that I find that when the camera is in my hand, and sometimes not, the connection between me and the beauty and the wonder of what I'm sitting there watching, it could just be the light falling across a dewdrop, like a single dewdrop, or maybe it's a cloud formation or the Great Migration in East Africa. There are so many scenarios where, and this is going to sound maybe a little bit hippie-esque then, but where I feel so connected to the world around me that I can almost, I'm overwhelmed by the song of the universe. There is nothing else around, and I'm sitting here in Florida and I've got goosebumps, and it's warm here, because that for me means that I'm at one with the environment and I'm at one with what I'm doing. And so many images in the book have happened on the last day or in the last minute or in the last hour after months and months sometimes of work. And then that frame comes along. But I think the complexity of what puts me in a scenario where I get to have that experience is so unbelievably large that I walked up a riverbed. There's the pictures in the book of the bicoloured tree porcupine. It's a fluorescent yellow mammal. And there are no rocks in the Amazon, or very few. I'm walking up a river in the middle of nowhere in bare feet. I stub my foot on a rock. I curse, as only an Australian can curse. And then I look up and here's this fluorescent mammal sitting in the tree next to me. Now, had I have not stubbed my toe, I would never have seen one of the rarest animals on Earth. Literally, I think the only fluorescent mammal on Earth. But I also find that I have a god of photography. I call him the god of photography. And if I put in the time and the hours and the sacrifices, sometimes that that element in the universe will give me a moment. There's an image there of a leopard cub coming up a tree and touching noses with its mother. I went backwards and forwards to that tree over 6 days, maybe, yeah, at least 6 days. And I'm racing for a bush plane. It's the propellers are spinning on the dirt. And my friend there, Frank, my friend I work with in that part of Africa, he's going, "We have got to go, Jace, we have got to go." And I said, "Stop at the tree one more time." "We cannot stop, you know." And I said, "We have to stop." I said, "Give me 30 seconds. And I swear to God, you know, that within about 17 seconds, that cub walked out of the grass, up that branch, and the universe froze. And as it came up and I took frames of the touching and everything, the one in the book is the one where the moment just before the touch, because I like that. And then we raced on. That was it. It was 30 seconds, but it was 6 days of visiting that tree before I got that moment. And then we just looked at each other and went, "Wow, that's just the wonder of nature." You could have driven past and nothing happened, but I think that's one of the greatest blessings of my life, is that as a teenager I knew what I wanted to do. I had a modicum of skill and desire and drive to make it happen. But then I moved forward feeling like I had a role and a purpose, and then I could share that with people. And I'll be forever grateful for that. It's not, the work I create is not about me or the stories I tell. It's about connecting everyone else with opportunities I think that they don't have.
You've been doing this for over 30 years, and in the end of the book, you share some of the lessons that you've learned about photography, that advice you would give to other photographers. Tell us a bit about some of those lessons that you'd like to pass along.
So with photography, one of the things is that everyone imagines what I do, for example, or people like myself, is like being on holiday. And so you're drinking margaritas on the beach, and then you go out when the light is good and take a few frames. Now, that happens. I've drunk margaritas on the beach. However, storytelling in photography is quite complex. And one of the things that I've tried to communicate in the book, I ran a scholarship for National Geographic for 8 years, and I hope to boot it up again, where the goal was to tell a story in 5 frames or less of a place you visited. Now, it could be your home, it could be the corner store, it could be the local park in different seasons. It is a wonderful mechanism for people learning to tell stories, and that is the math that I use. If I visit somewhere, I was just in Malta about a week ago, and I'm visiting an old city. So can I create, I'm not counting, but can I create 5 frames that bring someone into that environment and have them understand that experience, even if they never get there? Or maybe it makes them want to go there, which then has a butterfly effect for the economy for those places that people go to. So I basically, in the back of the book, I list the thought processes, the 10 or so elements of my criteria in my brain. It's very much behind the curtain of how I compose and tell a story in every single frame. So if you read that text, I'm doing that at high speed every time I push the button. And that is how I get my stories across, because you need to remember the person that's looking at your work is not there with you. They don't have the food, the smells, the taste, the pain. They don't have the joy necessarily, or the horror. So how do you bring them into the story? How do you lead them into that composition so that they have that connection? And that's what I've tried to do at the back, using the premise of the scholarship that I created for National Geographic, in order to manifest an image that someone else can understand. And it's all about less is more. We can all shoot so much in digital. I still shoot film on every assignment. I love film. But when we shoot digital, the temptation is to just push that button and think that we're going to get the frame we're after. I think, as someone that's been in the game a long time, less is more. Take less frames, think more about them, get high, get low, get close, get wide. All of these obvious things, but it's where you put every element in the frame. And so in the back of that book, if you're actually into photography and you want to know that these are the elements that you should be looking for in your frames, that is what you should be reading, not because I'm right, but maybe I am, but it's actually a way of connecting people with the work that you're going to create. And if you can do that, and you want a career in photography, or you just want your images to be better, then all of a sudden people are resonating with the work that you're doing, and they're understanding the work that you're doing better. And that just gives photographers and all creative people so much joy if they feel that their audience is connected to something that they're so passionate about.
And you point out the reality that you really shouldn't go into this if your goal is just to make money. It has to be a passion. It has to be, as in your case, you write, something that helps satisfy your curiosity.
In life, most people don't actually know what they want to do. And the few that do and are able to have a career out of that are very fortunate. And so in photography, people find an outlet. They find a way of expressing who they are, what their passions are, how they see the world. And humans have been telling stories visually for more than 60,000 years. You look at Indigenous Australian art, the oldest continuous culture on earth. We have, and I've photographed some of this, artwork on rock that's more than 50,000 year old. Now we are here, 21st century, we're using photography, whether it's phones, tablets, 35 millimeter. And what we're doing is we're telling our stories now. So I love it when people are passionate about creating imagery, and sometimes they don't actually know why they're doing it or why it means something to them, but it gives them an escape from maybe other elements of their life that don't satisfy them as much. And to me, that makes me very happy. There's a lot of photographers who are concerned about, understandably, and I am not immune to the economic forces of photography. I am well and truly at that pointy end of the wedge. But there are a lot of people who want to do it but are not willing to make the sacrifices. They're not willing to put in the time and spend every cent that they earn formulating some sort of path for them to get further into the market. When I started, every cent I earned from the zoo, every image I sold, I started a stock agency whilst I was at the zoo to sell images that I was taking to children's publishers and so on and so forth. All of that money, every weekend, every lunchtime, every morning break at the zoo, everything I didn't take a day off for 10 years. Now, that was difficult for my partners at the time, as you can imagine, but I was so passionate about what I wanted from it, and I was aware of that I was willing to make those sacrifices. But I think if you are a photographer or you are a creative person, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to those who say it'll never work or it's 1 in a billion or whatever the case is. I mean, yes, the numbers are stacked against you, but there are so many ways to create and contribute through photography and the visual arts that I think you would be doing yourself a misjustice. It should be about who you are and how you connect with your environment and the world around you. And I have met people who are farmers in the middle of nowhere to people who are corporate executives who love photography and find 5 minutes a month to do photography, and everyone in between. It is a wonderful way to have self-expression and to feel like you're part of something larger. So as far as social media and everything goes, we all have to do it. We all hate it. We're all caught up in it. And then we love it and all of those, the psychology of it. But you also need to realize that, and to your point is very valid, that no one gets rich or very few people get rich doing this. You need to have a different gauge by which you measure your successes and how you measure your life. Because this is, for me at least, this is a path that has shown me the world and is continuing, to show me the world. And I have other stories from that list that we created that we will put to market, by the book, hopefully, then we give volume 2 and volume 3, because that's the plan. And I'm just eternally grateful that for whatever machinations and the work ethic that my parents put into me and the support that they gave me to say, well, do whatever you want to do, just be happy. And that's the thing too. So if you have children who are creative, yes, it is scary. It is very scary to have a creative child, very scary, because the chances of them being financially viable are 50-50. Some would say less, but you just don't know. But you want a child that is happy, or a friend that is happy, or a parent that is happy, and they have this enormous passion for doing something, then you should be lifting that person up and saying, the world does need another starving artist. The world does need someone who is contributing with their words or their deeds or their imagery or their sculpture, whatever the case might be. lift those people up, because at the end of the day, and you and I know we've been around quite a while, my friend, we know that as you get older, those things that make you happy are really so crucial in our lives. So if they're 15 or they're 10 or they're 50, lift that person up and say, let's see what you can do, because you don't know what they're capable of. Most people don't realize what they're capable of.
Well, to see these wonderful photographs and learn about the stories behind them, the book is Icebergs to Iguanas: Photographic Journeys Around the World by Jason Edwards. Jason, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, if you'd like to purchase Icebergs to Iguanas, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more interviews you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.